Awesome. So we have so Laura's joining us from Iowa, and Brad's joining us from California. Evelyn from UT, on-ramps in the Austin area, Missouri, San Diego, people from all over, Katie. So this is wonderful. We've got people joining us from all over the country, and that's really exciting. It's really good to get to talk to educators around the country and to know that this is a universal issue that is facing people around the country. I know that it's something that is very near and dear to my heart and to the hearts of our panelists, who I'm going to introduce in a minute. But new teachers are definitely the future of our education system, without a doubt. And the best way to train those teachers prior to coming into the profession and then in their first few years of the profession is absolutely, in my opinion, the most important thing that we can do in education to make sure that our students are best served by the best teachers that they can have before them. You know, I mean, Deborah Ball talks a lot about how, you know, in a lot of professions, you wouldn't want someone practicing what they're doing when they're actually doing it to you, like a pilot or a doctor. And I think teachers have a lot of that same pressure on them in their first years in the profession to really just have to hit the ground running, and it can be a real challenge to support them well. But these ladies are doing an excellent job in California to make sure that teachers are prepared to enter the classroom and then are supported in their first few years. So I think we have a lot to learn from them, and I'm really excited to begin the conversation. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists. So we have Katrina Tchaikovsky, who is an educator from the San Diego Bay Area. She's spent 27 years working in the area and currently serves as the program manager for the Sweetwater Union High School District Teacher Induction Program. She holds credentials in math, English, and social sciences for all grade levels, and has been a classroom teacher, grant coordinator, resource teacher, curriculum specialist. She has done all of the things that you can do in public education.
It happens when you're old, teacher.
So she lives within the boundaries of the districts where she works, which is awesome. I think that's really, really special. And attended college on the East Coast and grew up in Portland, Oregon. So welcome, Katrina. We're very excited to have you join us. Also joining us is Andrea Saltzman-Martin and Kathryn Close and Estella Williams Chiswick, whose name I probably also mispronounced. She can correct me, but all joining us from San Diego State University's College of Education. Andrea joined the College of Education in 2007 as an instructional designer and earned a Master of Arts degree in education with an emphasis in educational technology and a bachelor's degree in social sciences from SDSU, and supports the College of Education faculty with course design, development with an emphasis on hybrid and online course delivery. So she's certainly got the expertise in building online learning environments that I think a lot of new teachers can benefit from as they're developing their own personal learning environments for themselves and then also for their students. Kathryn Close has been in the field of education for over 40 years, serving as an elementary teacher, resource teacher, principal. She's another one of these educators who has had all of the jobs, and as a faculty member at San Diego State University for both the School of Teacher Education and the Department of Special Ed. She holds multiple credentials, including elementary education, administration, special education, and an MA in education. A dominant role throughout her varied and long career has been that of a coach and mentor to both teachers in the classroom and to pre-service teachers. Her current work at SDSU includes serving as a team leader, instructor, and supervisor for a cohort of 28 pre-service teachers pursuing multiple subject credentials as the coordinator and supervisor for a group of 8 interns pursuing a mild moderate ed specialist credential. And Dr. Estella Chiswick is an associate professor in the School of Teacher Education, where for over 20 years, she's taught courses in educational psychology for teacher credential programs, as well as the master's and doctoral programs. In addition to teaching, she maintains a connection to K-12 classrooms by supervising and supporting students as student teachers in their practicum experiences. Her time as a supervisor has led her to collaborate with other faculty to improve supervision methods, and this work has led to the development of a SMILE, which stands for Shared Mentoring and Instructional Learning Environments, a university supervision model that uses professional learning communities among classroom teachers, student teachers, and the university supervisor, as well as a video to coach student teachers. Her research focuses on the effects of SMILE and video-based coaching on student teachers' achievement on performance assessments, teaching efficacy, how effective am I at saying that word, cognitive focus on learning planning, lesson planning, and pedagogical skill development. So you see we have a highly qualified and very well experienced group of panelists joining us today. So for the next 53 minutes, I'm going to shut up and let them do the talking. So welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. And let's go ahead and get started. So why don't we start with just sort of the introductory question. What was it about video-enhanced coaching to support pre-service and new teachers? What motivated you to get started doing that?
Well, I think I worked with Estella Chiswick at San Diego State, starting a few years back, looking at video coaching model. Part of that was informed because our students were having to do it for their performance assessment, originally the PACT, now the EdTPA. So they were needing to be able to video record themselves and analyze their teaching based on that recording. And we just saw the value of doing that beyond just one assessment piece. So we started having students record, and at that point in time, they had to edit their recordings down to 5 or 10 minutes. We were using another online platform. We couldn't comment on them directly, but we could sit down with the students and view them together or view them in class. And so we were looking for opportunities to expand it more, and which led us to Sydney and all the value that they had of not only not having to edit it down and having all of those problems of saving the video, but to also to actually be able to interact with the video with comments.
Yeah, so that conversation piece, the feedback piece is really valuable. You know, I remember when I was a pre-service teacher, when I was getting my degree in education, we would record videos on camcorders, big old camcorders, and then turn around and watch them. But the feedback would be on a piece of paper or something like that, and it wasn't as easy to sort of see right next to what I'm watching, see what's happening here. So is that something that you find to be a meaningful experience for student teachers or new teachers, and provides them with an additional level of understanding about their practice? Anybody want to take it? Go ahead.
Stella, are you trying to?
Oh, and Stella was having some problems with sound, so she may have to join us. Let me see if I can find. So, Katrina, why don't you talk a little bit about the experience for teachers? And while we do that, I'm going to see if I can find Stella in the attendees and promote her to panelist. So.
Okay. Well, I would say our interest in using video really centered around a desire to refocus candidates' attention on evidence. And we're really concerned with teachers understanding that effective instruction is a function of coherence. And so for us, coherence is really the alignment between written, taught, and tested curriculum. This idea that you need to know what your outcomes are, you need to know what your goals are per Common Core standards, California standards, district mandated, outcomes. And the taught curriculum is obviously what's captured in a video, and those two things need to have a direct relationship to the tested curriculum or how you assess student learning. So We were pretty good last year with our new induction candidates at collecting evidence of proficiency in CSTP5, which is about assessment, and also in planning, like 3 and 4, as far as like written curriculum. But as far as the taught curriculum, evidencing that and collecting primary source text, as it were, that we could use to facilitate growth is really impossible unless you have a video record of teachers' work. So basically, CIBME gave us the opportunity to collect evidence on the taught curriculum that we could then juxtapose with the written and the tested curriculum and have much richer conversations about ultimately what happened as the culminating outcome of a very complex planning process. And I would like to acknowledge my colleagues at San Diego State, because it was through them that I learned about CIBME, and their decision to select CIBME as a platform to work through with pre-service teachers, I think is going to really enhance our induction program's ability to engage teachers in long-term conversations about how they've grown, because the change that happens from when a person first captures their video at San Diego State and what they generate in the second semester of their year 2 induction work is so significant. And now teachers will be able to have a portfolio of video artifacts that really validate their growth in a way that has never been possible before. So I think that I'm really looking forward to this kind of continuum of experience that video documentation will support, as the majority of our new teachers come from San Diego State. That'll be a really cool partnership for our institutions.
Yeah, that's really exciting to see sort of a pipeline of teachers coming through. And I love what you said about the taught curriculum. I think that that's a really fine and an important point in education. You know, how I think a lot of school leaders around the country are having trouble finding a way to really clearly say, okay, kids should know X. At what point are they being taught that particular learning outcome? And I think that that's really a really exciting point to add an additional layer of data to the universe of information that informs our practice. That's really good. So Stella, I tried to set up your sound. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can, twice. So, so what I'm gonna do? No, I got a solution for it. Okay, so I think now we should be in good shape.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Nice. All right.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. And I'm going to blame it on the weather, San Diego weather. I wanted to add, it's been, ever since I've joined the teacher credential program and been a part of it, and supervised student teachers, I've always wanted to use video. And like you said, TJ, when I first started 20 years ago, you had the big camcorders that you could go and bring into the classroom, and you had to have that VHS tape, and you record, but then you have to find a place to watch it, which wasn't always convenient. But now CIBME offers this way in which you can record. Students can bring their cell phones into the classroom, easily record themselves, easily upload that video onto the computer, and then have it such that the supervisor and the student teacher can now watch this video at the same time. And then also what Katrina talked about, this evidence base, which is so important. Without video, you don't really have any evidence when you're providing any kind of coaching information to the student teacher. You can talk about how the questions that you asked and how the students respond to that question, or how you redirected students and how that may have been effective, or how it wasn't effective for these other students over there. You can raise all those issues, but there's no evidence for it. There's nothing that really informs the student teacher that that actually happened, because as you know, as a teacher, there are so many ideas and goals and issues and things you want to keep in mind that you cannot remember everything. So this is evidence that the coach can share with the student teacher and help the student teacher realize certain things. I also want to talk about the idea of what are those skills that are really important, and how Kathryn Close and I are working to try to identify some of those essential pedagogical skills. We call them what we consider the essential pedagogical skills. And we wanted to make sure that these skills are something that are observable, not only to the supervisor, but also when you show it to the student teacher, they can see it. Things like, are you waiting enough time after you ask a question? You know, when you identify those skills and then you have the video to really support and provide that evidence for the student teacher to see how effective they are, I think, and I hope, because this is our first year doing this, we can really encourage and see student teachers improve in their practice.
So that idea of specificity keeps coming up, and I really love that's something that it seems like everyone is focusing on for new teachers, because I know. So in my previous job, I worked with new teachers in Houston ISD and sort of helped to run the new teacher onboarding and induction program for the district, and one of the things that we often faced, and I'm sure lots of induction programs face, is what are the most important elements that a new teacher needs to know to be successful on day one, and how do we ensure that those specific elements are mastered as they're walking in the door, or if not, soon thereafter, because it needs to become really, really concrete. And one of the things that we often dealt with is a lot of our effective practices were not so specifically defined. But the advent of video, the ability to actually say, see this is what this looks like. You can quantify the amount of time in your wait time that's effective, all of those sorts of things. Have you found that level of specificity is providing a sense of comfort for teacher candidates, new teachers, so that they feel a little bit more like they know, okay, this is what's going to make me effective when I walk in the door?
Well, if I can just kind of respond, TJ, to what you're saying, you used the word specificity. I think you used it 4 or 5 times, although I didn't count it. I would maybe take one step back in terms of aperture and just think about, kind of common language or a common conception of what these, what my colleagues at State are calling the essential pedagogical skills. What one of us considers critical for a new teacher might be different than what somebody else considers critical. For example, I hear a number of administrators in my district cite CSTP2 or classroom management as the number one need of beginning teachers. And I keep finding myself having these conversations with people about how the interaction between the teacher and the students, or the level of universal engagement in the class, is largely a function of the planning that the teacher's done to structure activities that engender engagement. It's much less about classroom protocols or corrective discipline or things like that. So I just bring that up because in our district, our superintendent has defined effective first instruction as our mission. So, what is that? And all teachers are different. I don't think that we would want to say that every teacher needs to focus on the same skill, especially in an induction program. So perhaps, my perspective is slightly different because I'm dealing with people who've already obtained preliminary credentials. But the value of video to me then is that it works both ways. It generates evidence from a candidate that can be engaged not only by a coach, but by peers. And maybe we have time to talk about that later. But it also allows, through the use of tags or directions on how to interact with that video, it allows a district to help communicate to candidates what counts most for the kids in that community per district mission. So I think that that's, specificity and beyond. It's just sort of building a common understanding of what our shared work entails.
Yeah, I love that. And if anybody wants to respond to that, I do think I used the wrong word, right? But breaking down solutions to teaching problems to really observable, granular chunks, I guess. And then being able to, I think you're absolutely right. So often we diagnose the problem, like you said, when you look at the classroom, you can diagnose the problem, but have I actually found the right solution? And being able to actually apply those different variables, I think, is really, really valuable for new teachers.
I think one of the things that he was saying and Stella was mentioning is that opening of the conversation. And because we find that we use all this academic language, engagement can be one, we use all of these terms, but what it means to me and what it looks like and what it might mean to you or someone else, and certainly a novice or pre-service teacher and even a beginning teacher, you know, they start in our program deer in the headlights. They don't even know what these words mean at all, and you keep defining them and refining them, and then back to being able to look at evidence. Well, why? Let's have the discussion on if establishing rapport and connection with students, what does that look like, and why does this example a better example than that example? And if you have a video, if you've got real live teaching situations of which to look at, whether they're yours or something else that you're using as an exemplar, you can have those conversations. I would agree.
And let me add, I think everybody can hear me.
We can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think the issue is, in my line of work, I can use the term intersubjectivity, and that means that when two people are trying to have a conversation, that you hope that each person has the same shared understanding about what the ideas are. And what we're talking about is, of course, what is good pedagogy? What is effective pedagogy? And we can use terms like classroom management or wait time or engagement or whatever. And the important thing is that the coach and the student teacher have to come to some kind of shared understanding as to what those ideas mean. And part of that is to use video as a way in which to operationally define those concepts. So SIBME is a really wonderful way in which that can happen. Last year, in the work that I've done with Kathryn Close with her students in her block, because we run a cohort model. So there's about 30 students in each cohort. And Kathy was the cohort leader for that block, and I just was there teaching educational psychology and supervising some of the students, but I also used my research in there. And I wanted to know whether or not student teachers, how they valued the feedback that they were given, and I wanted to compare it with written feedback and oral feedback, and whether or not it came from this guide teacher and whether or not it came from the supervisor. And what I found is that, you know, the students love the feedback that they get from the guide teacher. And of course they should, because they work with that person very closely. But I also found that they really valued the video feedback. And the reason why they valued the video feedback is because they could actually see what they were doing and have this discussion about what does that mean for either students' learning or for their effectiveness as a teacher. And they really enjoyed that. That really helped them feel a lot more efficacious as a teacher. So these are things that I think are very thrilling, and it's the reason why I'm very excited about using SIBME as a supervisor, and now as a block leader in my own block.
Yeah, and this is fantastic, and you're actually sort of leading into my next question. But before I ask my next question, I want to make sure that all of our attendees know that we would love for you to join this conversation. So if you have any questions for this very excellent group of panelists, I'm just so impressed, and have the time is flying by. I wish we could do this for another 3 hours, but as the time is going by, we're about halfway through our time together. If you have questions, go ahead and type them into the chat, and I'll make sure that I skip my questions and go to your questions so that we can address those. And while we start to populate some of those, I just want to, oh look, we're already getting them. So Crystal saying, video observation will not only help to identify areas of opportunities, allow me to reflect on specific solutions and ponder what resource the novice teacher needs to be successful good stuff. And I think that sort of leads me to my next question, and then Nola will go to yours, which my question is, in what way has the conversation changed now that video is a more prevalent part of the development and coaching process for candidates and new teachers? And by that I mean, so my experience as a coach going from not using video to using video was so much of what I would do in an observation before using video was write down what I saw or write down what I heard. And now all of a sudden I don't do that anymore. And so in what way does that allow me time to, as Crystal said, reflect and think about specific resources that I might share, or how have you seen that change the conversation, either between a coach or a supervisor and a new teacher or a student, or between students, as you said?
Well, I would like to offer that I met with my team of induction mentors yesterday, and we actually talked about this, how we're going to use SIBME this semester, how it's going to expand on what we did last semester, so it's not the same kind of routine experience with the platform. And ultimately, I think the expression that beauty's in the eye of the beholder kind of comes out, because of course there's no such thing as a bias-free text. And there's no such thing as a bias-free observation. And just because it's on video doesn't make things any more empirically neutral than it would if it were a human being taking written notes. So what we talked about is really engaging groups of candidates in considering, this pre-observation conference, the video, and then the post-observation conference. That's pretty standard. But in the pre-observation conference now, we really need to be thinking, who do we want in the video? Whose voice do we want to hear? Why? What types of student artifacts do we want to capture in the video? What does that suggest about who's holding the camera? What kind of angle should we have in this video? Can we do this from a desktop? Do we need to have a microphone on the table? Is this about looking at interactions among students, or are there certain English learners that we want to follow? Is this, do we want to be sure that we're considering students with IEPs or long-term English learners? Whose voice actually makes it into this text? And so that's just one example of how I think even having that conversation, recognizing that, Oscar Aguiar is sitting in the back of the room and nobody's ever heard his voice, so perhaps he should be featured in the video, has now made this, cliche to some degree, word equity, a more prominent consideration in how it is that we plan for instruction. So from my vantage point, it works at that meta level to engage people in considering what should be present in a video, whose voices should be heard and to what end.
Yeah, and it sounds like it helps to sort of refine the goal setting process also, because as you're going through those questions, you're really identifying what's the one thing or the focus that I'm going to look at in this particular observation. Great. Anyone else?
I think we found just a little bit taking off from what you said, Kathryn, is that it's a learning process for the students using the video to begin with. So it's not a easy, even though SIBME is far easier than everything else, every student we work with and whatever tool that they have, the phone that they have or the iPad or whatever, and the classroom that they're in and the guide teacher that they have, it takes a while to get everybody up to speed, and they're calling, the ed tech, and finally about mid-fall semester, everybody seems to be on board, being able to use the platform more equally and begin to actually engage in the videos themselves and begin to find and tag their own videos with questions, with ideas, far more reflective. But from the beginning in September or August, it's so new. The language is new. What they're trying to do is so new that it does take a little while to come up to speed. And I love what Kathryn was saying, because I can see actually using some of her ideas in our upcoming pre-conference, the supervision that we're going to be doing with our students in January and February, getting them ready for their EdTPA, and actually talking about these part of the pre-conference, talking about the video. I don't know about Kathryn, with you and your district, but I know that we have to get permission from parents to have their students in videos, and if they don't give permission, we can't have them in the video. I don't know how that works within a district, but from San Diego State, that's what we have to do.
Well, we were concerned about that, of course, in the onset of this, and so basically, what we have done is relied on our district's opt-out default kind of policy that unless a family explicitly opts out of video, they have in fact opted in as part of their annual registration process. That said, I will say that I'll commend SIBME for creating a firewall that is password protected. Every quarter, our candidates and mentors sign an agreement that ensures they will abide by certain district board policies and admin regulations about maintaining student confidentiality. And so I think our candidates are instructed about not housing videos on any publicly accessible space or hard drive. They're expressly forbidden to post anything on social media. SIBME is working with Canvas right now to ensure more fluid kind of exchange of materials that way. So when our candidates submit assignments on Canvas, they actually link directly to SIBME, and we're working on that. But all of those things are like 3 levels of password protected. And so all of those videos are maintained exclusively within the district, which is something that I think it's a privilege for us, like with you guys and the TPA. I mean, this stuff goes out to a much larger audience, so I could totally see how there would be different rules at play. But in induction, as long as everybody understands and has acknowledged, the rules of the game, so far we've been able to have pretty free exchange of these videos within our program. Knock on wood.
Yeah, and that does sort of go to Nola's first question. She asked any updates regarding SIBME becoming HIPAA compliant, and I don't know. You might be saying HIPAA and meaning HIPAA, like the health law, but also FERPA. Those are the 2 big laws about privacy that we deal with here in the States, and we are working on actually that compliance piece. We actually hypothesize that we are compliant. We just don't like to say it until we've got some external guiding force saying, yes, you can put that on your, stamp that on your website as compliant. But all of those layers of security are incredibly important to us at SIBME. We're a group of educators. That's what that founded this company and built this company. And so we get the idea that, we're dealing with kids' lives, and we're dealing with their video footage being out there on the internet, and we want to make that secure. So that's why we don't allow for instance, the ability to share links to video across, I can't just email a link to somebody and then they can click on it to access it. Because of that level of security, it's so important to us. So that's a good question. I'm going to go to Nola's next question, and then Jill, I'll go to yours. She's wondering if your work is focusing more on helping students not only diagnose their challenges, but also using SIBME video to help them practice, such as deliberate practice strategies.
I think I will try to take that one. And so in my response, I think I want to address something that I wanted to say in regards to the previous question, which is how has it changed the interactions between the coach and the student teacher? And it's changed it in a number of ways, at least for me, because I can ask these, do you notice questions? Do you notice what's going on here? And I think that's very valuable, which I don't think I could do without video and without SIBME. So I can tag and say, do you notice what's going on here? And then when I sit with them, I can also ask the same question. Do you know do you notice what's going on here? So I think those are very important kinds of issues to talk about. And then I forgot, TJ, what was the other
idea
thing?
about deliberate practice for students?
Deliberate practice,
yeah.
Right. And so in my class, one of the things that I want them to do is to record themselves. Actually, it's not just my class, it's all classroom management classes at San Diego State. In the credential program, we had this assignment where student teachers have to video record themselves demonstrating classroom management skills. In my class, I've sort of listed what are those classroom management skills are, what I'd like for them to be doing. And so it's not a reaction, you know, here, this is what you've done, but now it's, this is what I want you to try to do. And I want to see it and give you feedback about how well you are doing that. So it's more on this, it's becoming a tool for students to actually try and develop pedagogy, not just getting, you know, being reflective about their pedagogy. So I think that's a change that we're doing now in our program. Kathy, do you want to add more to that?
No, yeah, I think that's another layer. So we're doing multiple layers of things. So some is in reaction to them doing that teaching part in the classroom related to, you know, some lessons that they've developed. And the other ones are as they're in our courses and stuff, and we're trying to tell them what good teaching is. You can give assignments, video assignments, and say, we've talked about this, we've read about this, we've discussed this. I want you to go out and practice and, you know, put together a clip. And this is specifically what some things we want you to practice and then comment on.
Absolutely.
You know, one thing that that I think we didn't really consider enough at the onset of this was the value of a video for individual reflection where nobody else sees the video but the teacher. And that's something that if I were going to do this again from the get-go, and when we do this next year with our year 2 people, hopefully, and by the way, they are just year 2 candidates that use SIDME in our district. The year 1 people don't do that until their second year. I would say, you know, speaking to this idea of practice and safety taking, you know, using something like SIDME, it's so easy just to kind of upload multiple takes of your lesson that you can really observe then in a really safe way what your own classroom looks like, because nobody cares more about it than the teacher. Teacher cares more about it than the coach or the TPA grader or anybody else. So I think that that's something that maybe doesn't receive enough attention or consideration when people implement initiatives to capture video.
Great, and you just began the answer to Jill's question, which was do you have the teacher reflect on their own teaching and then have the supervisor provide reflection. So this is more of a logistic thing, and what Katrina is talking about is in the SIDME platform specifically. The first place a video goes when someone records it is into a private workspace where the only person who has access to that video is the person who recorded it. And so if that is the teacher, then they're recording themselves and it goes into their private workspace. They have all the functionality available to them. They can do the commenting and all that sort of stuff. But the best part about it is that sort of private, secure space where I can just watch myself teach and really sort of, adjust to the idea of watching myself teach, and then B, really start to hone in on some areas. So have y'all had any experience with that at SDSU, and what are your thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Stella.
Well, I think Kathy and I are in a very unique experience this year because we're both cohort leaders of different cohorts. But because we've worked together in the past so closely on how do we develop student teachers or future teachers, we can now use our 2 cohorts as a way to sort of look at some of the things that we really are interested in that we couldn't do otherwise. And so regarding this is the issue of how do student teachers look and respond to feedback. And so for me, I wanted the student teachers to respond to the feedback that they are getting from supervisors. So when the supervisor goes in and watches the video and then tags various things, like me ask a question or say bright spot or say they recommend an idea, I wanted my student teachers to respond to that. I thought that was very important. Clearly, there's some expertise that is given here by the supervisor, and I wanted the student teacher to respond to that. But that was one approach. The other approach is what Kathy's doing, which is more, I think, combines a lot of what Katrina is talking about, and I think I'll let Kathy talk about it.
I do what Stella does, but because they're putting up multiple video clips, that sometimes I want them to respond to what their supervisor said, and then sometimes I want them to put up a video clip that their supervisor has not seen. They've not been in the classroom. It's a new lesson, and I want the student to reflect on it first and to comment against certain pedagogical skills, and to maybe make suggestions of what they could have done better or what they liked about what they did, and then for their supervisor to go in afterwards and respond to their comments and add more comments if they want to. So I've done both.
And so for me as a researcher, I'm interested in what, I'm sure there's pros and cons for both, and it'll be interesting to take a look at how student teachers respond to either responding or reflecting on their video first. I think there's a lot of value in that. They get to, think about what's important to them, and the supervisor can support that development. But then there's also this idea that having experts in the field sort of highlight certain things that maybe they didn't know or notice to begin with, and then responding to that. So the supervisor responds first, and then the student teacher follows up with the response. I think what's really interesting, I think both are important, and maybe there's certain ways in which that can be used appropriately in a program. So maybe there's a time when you want them to be noticing things, maybe when they're first starting out, and then as they start sort of this gradual release, as they develop more skills and understanding, the shared understanding about what are the effective pedagogical skills, you can then allow them to lead in their ability to reflect first, and then being supported by the supervisor. So those are some of my thoughts.
One thing that's cool about what you just said is it helps me to think about, the way video can and should be used potentially differently in an induction versus pre-service, acknowledging that becoming a good teacher takes time, and it's a developmental process, and, it's individually differentiated. So as you're speaking, I would just say that the individual learning plan is a big component per CTC of any induction program. And actually, there'll be a transition plan that comes from our pre-service candidates into their induction program. So what we're trying to do is, Sydney, is, as I responded to Nola's question in the chat, is kind of flatten the relationship between the people generating the video and the people providing the feedback, because as you said, Stella, there is content experts have a different kind of power relationship with beginning teachers than their peers do. And when I was first figuring out how to resurrect our induction program, I asked all the potential candidates, what could we do for you to help you become a better teacher? And the overwhelming response from all of these people before they got into our program was, let me observe instruction, good, bad, or ugly. Let me watch other people teach. Don't tell me who's who, because I can figure it out. I can tell who's good. I can feel it in the classroom. So I was influenced by that, and observation obviously became a central component of induction, but it's also one reason why we expect, as one of our induction assignments, candidates to gather in what's called a huddle in Sydney. So these are all induction candidates who are in huddle, and the only additional person who's invited is a mentor or a coach, but a person who's kind of more a colleague than a content expert. So that dynamic's been really interesting, because then the candidate really has control over what the focus of the observation is, what they share, what the tags are. They're, to some degree, some people are ready for that and some of them aren't. So, it's kind of a work in progress, but that's just an idea for consideration by others in the field.
Yeah, I think that idea of collaboration can be a bit overwhelming to people sometimes, but I remember from 10 years in the classroom that an American school classroom is the loneliest work environment in the country. And even though you're surrounded by people all day long, they're children. And you don't get the opportunity to have those collegial conversations that so many other workplace environments provide. And the opportunity to create those spaces online for that ongoing conversation and the ability to watch other teaching, I think, can be incredibly valuable. What challenges do you foresee with either that structure or with a more hierarchical structure?
Well, one of the things that we talked about yesterday in thinking about next semester and next steps is, we really want the way SIBME is used to align with each candidate's goals in their individual learning plan. So basically, it's kind of just an alignment challenge. How can we allow the way we expect people to use SIBME to be flexible enough to provide the candidate with a sense that it's a tool? How can we allow it to be flexibly implemented so that the candidate uses it to achieve his or her instructional goals, not the other way around, not so that they can, complete an induction program assignment, check the box, and, get recommended for a clear credential. So I think it's maintaining consistency in terms of how it's used, but keeping it flexible enough so that it really helps each individual candidate purposefully, and intentionally pursue growth. That would be a challenge for us.
I think for us, we only have the students for 2 semesters. We've got this 1-year push, and because it is developmental, the first quarter of the 1-year push is figuring just basic things out, and getting, both used to the tool and used to seeing yourself on video, understand some of what it is good practices look like and stuff. And so we certainly push towards more collaboration that's organic and that can be helpful, but they're in different schools often and different grade levels and different cultures within those. So I think it's a bit more of a challenge for us. And then, like I said, they're pretty much done in May, and we recommend them for credential, and we hope that they take this as an ongoing tool, but we don't know.
Well, and it was, I will say, that the Sweetwater is the state's largest secondary district, right? We have 26 schools. It's a very diverse kind of place. And what we asked candidates to do the second quarter was to form a huddle with at least 2 other colleagues based on some rationale. And we offered the research question from candidates' individual learning plans. We published all of those. And so it was really fascinating to see how candidates reached out of their site, out of their content area, to find a person who had a similar research question for their individual learning plan. And they invited that person, who they'd never met before, into their huddle to have this kind of, look at my teaching. And some of the paragraph responses, I was like, guys, stop, you got to do lesson planning. Like, this is nuts, the amount of time you're putting into this. And then when they met each other in person, it was almost like this kind of, social media phenomenon where they knew each other from the teaching, from their classrooms, and then they met each other, at seminars and at the round table, and they presented their growth. And for our district, it was a really useful tool to help, again, maintain a focus on what our purpose is. It's effective first instruction. We're not here to generate test scores. We're not here to, engage in some, other activity. Our goal is to evidence effective instruction. What does that look like? It's a shared purpose, regardless of your content area or your grade level, whether you're teaching 7th grade or 12th grade. And so from that standpoint, I think of our colleague who's, into blended learning. This is the future right here. If we're not doing these things, we're like stuck in 1970.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you're thinking about the ways in which these online communities can be built around a learning outcome for the teacher. And that rather than saying, I'm going to arbitrarily set up huddles for people, which is something that you can do, that's a part of it, but that you also have this choice to say, all right, begin with the end in mind. What's your goal in instruction? And then how can you create these learning environments on the internet through the Sydney platform? That to me is the most valuable thing that we can do, and I think that that's great. So we only have about 9 minutes left, and I want to give everybody a time, an opportunity to sort of do some final thoughts and close anything out. And if anybody has any other questions, I want to be sure to leave space open for that as well. But I guess the last question that I would have for all of you is, you've talked a lot about sort of the lessons that you've learned as you've gone through this experience. What advice would you have for a program or a university or a school district that's just starting out doing this for the first time, doing video for the first time in a really sort of integrated way as a part of their learning experience? What advice would you have for them?
I think they should hit the, I forget the name of the site, but Harvard School of Education did an extensive set of studies on how to use video, and they have a toolkit on how to use video. I'm sure if you just Google like Harvard video teaching, amazing toolkit to get people kind of oriented to some lessons that people throughout the country have learned about this. That's a great resource.
And I'll share a link to that. It's the Best Foot Forward project. I would also probably say that there's probably some great research coming out of SDSU that you could look at as well. So hopefully we can get that as well. But I'll put a link to that, what Katrina's talking about, into the chat so everybody has an opportunity to look at it. What other advice do you have?
I think it's two things. One is I'm really glad that our program sat down and thought about what are some what we consider essential pedagogical skills. Now, I think every program should sort of come and sit and think about what they think are important to them. I think it should be context specific, but I think it's really important for us. We know that we have the EdTPA to align with, and we also have the standards, the California teaching standards, that we also need to be thinking about as well. And so when our supervisors go out there, what is it that we want? How do we want to develop the student teachers? And I think it was very helpful for us to sort of identify those skills, at least say that this is a beginning discussion about it, and put it out there and encourage our supervisors to use that. I think it helps to have everybody see, when they're looking at a classroom interaction, that there are certain things that they know that they can be looking for, creating that shared mentoring experience. So I think that's one important thing. And the other thing is, I think this is a tool, so it can't just be something that you put out there, but you need to think very carefully about how you want people to use it. So how do you want students to use it? Do you want them to either respond to feedback or initiate the feedback, whatever it is? I think you want to think about how the interaction should be. And then the third thing that I've begun to notice, even though we trained supervisors and we gave these pedagogical skills, I think there's still room for more growth among supervisors, and me included, and how we give feedback. So I noticed that some of our supervisors are resorting to sort of a scripting approach to providing feedback when tagging, which is kind of interesting because the video captures that already. So you don't have to describe again what the video has already described. I think what we need to do is think about what is it that we're trying to say. If we isolate a particular few seconds of teaching interaction, and it's a great thing, but what do we want to communicate to the student teacher that not only lets them know that, hey, this is a great bright spot, but maybe, this could be, this is a way to think about it, or it's great because, or this is the theoretical connection to. I think that kind of, I think there's a lot of growth there in the kind of feedback that we provide student teachers. And I'm interested in looking into that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's excellent advice. So I think, thinking about what the idea of, you have to start with what is the learning outcome. It's just the same thing as designing any other learning environment, right? What is the thing that I want either my students or these new teachers, these new educators, or experienced educators to learn? And then how do I map from where we are now through video towards that learning outcome? I think that that's excellent insight and something that we can all continue to refine. And then the idea of what is, continuing to figure out what does feedback look like. I think that that's something else to really consider, because it does completely change the conversation, as one of our previous blog or happy hours was titled, when suddenly you're not being so descriptive all the time. So I'm going to give everybody, just want to have a minute for just a couple of plugs. So I put into the chat, there are 2 other upcoming webinars this month that I want you to know about. And there are links. They're the 2 links that I posted with zoom.us as the beginning of the URL. The first webinar link that you see there is for our next webinar, which is coming up on Thursday, with Dr. Tanya Goree and 2 instructional coaches from Francone Elementary School in the Cy-Fair Independent School District. They will be talking a little bit about that feedback process and then how they use their video library to really build out a best practices library for their faculty. And then the second link is to our webinar on January 25th with Justin Bader from the Principal Center, who will be talking about how to begin that process of reflection with the teacher, moving from what he calls why questions to how questions. So you can find out what a why question and a how question is, and find out how he begins that reflection process also with teachers as you're reviewing video. But both of those webinars have got a very high bar to overcome from this outstanding group of panelists, and I just can't thank you enough for the opportunity to have this conversation. And I want to give you, we've got 2 more minutes left, so if there's anything else that you'd like to share with us before we log off, just go ahead and let us know.
It's a pleasure working with you, and I would say SIBME, you and the whole SIBME support team have been very responsive to any of our needs and quick responding, and that makes it even nicer collaboration.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Well, I have to say that too. I mean, for the user, first of all, it's as I mentioned to a comment, user-friendly. This stuff is plug and play. It's like you can figure it out without having any training. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that, but our new candidates are up and running. Their mentors help them out. It doesn't require like a formal sit-down, session in order to become operational. That's huge. Help, I mean, within minutes, you get an email back from the help desk. I mean, I've never had a platform like that before. And then finally, having an opportunity to talk with coders at SIBME about how to integrate within Canvas. I mean, super interesting. I mean, I got to spend an hour and a half trying to understand how to make that happen. So people at SIBME were interested enough to do that. And that's cool.
Well, like I said earlier, we're a platform built by educators for educators, and every single person who sits in the office having those conversations has a background in the classroom, and we know what it's like, and we know the importance of every single moment in a classroom and in a school and in a university. And so it's important to us to make sure that we keep teacher voice at the center of our company. And so we are very, very grateful for all of you for joining us and for the wonderful input that we've gotten both from our excellent panelists and then also from a lot of our attendees. Great comments and questions. It's been a really fantastic conversation, and I couldn't thank everyone enough for joining us. And we hope to see you again soon, maybe on Thursday, and if not Thursday, then in a couple of weeks on the 25th. And everyone have a wonderful day, and thanks a lot. All right, bye.
Great, thank you. Bye-bye.